My name is Zara Lockhart. I'm 35 years old, an Air Force officer serving as an operations and maintenance liaison at Andrews. I keep aircraft in check, make pilots safer, and keep my past locked away. The morning the hangar fell silent, I was wiping oil from an access panel on an F-22, tuned into the steady hum of ventilation fans and distant ground power units. The metal carried the scent of rain. Jet fuel burned at the back of my throat. The checklist on my tablet scrolled green, line after line, predictable, factual, devoid of emotion, until the sound of boots cut sharp across the concrete. My father, Colonel Marcus Lockhart, filled the doorway with squared shoulders and a jaw set for confrontation. He didn't offer a greeting. He threw his hard hat onto the steel table. It struck with a ringing crack that made heads turn. "A mechanic can't fly," he shouted, his voice bouncing off ribs and rivets. He jabbed toward the Raptor's nose, then toward the cockpit. "Prove it or strip off the uniform." My ears didn't ring. They sharpened. Training does that. It narrows the world down to what actually matters. I placed the rag down, drew the ladder close, and climbed without an extra breath. I didn't argue. I answered to data and procedures, not to his temper. The canopy smelled faintly of sealant and glass. I eased into the seat, fingers tracing switches I'd known for years through muscle memory I never advertised. When I reached for the harness, my sleeve shifted upward. The colonel, our wing commander, not my father, stood 2 steps left of the ladder, midway through a remark to maintenance control. His words stopped cold, his eyes locking onto my wrist. The world narrowed to that exposed marking, the ink dark against skin. TG-0717. "Top Gun," he whispered. The nearest crew chief froze mid-hand signal. A wrench clinked once against the floor. Somewhere, a coffee cup stopped halfway to someone's lips. The fans kept spinning but seemed to drift far away. The hangar breathed in and held it. Across the concrete, my father's boots didn't move. His face drained of color. His jaw dropped in a way I had never witnessed in a man who treated control like oxygen. For 12 years, he called what I do fixing, as though I were patching a fence post. The colonel moved his gaze from my wrist to my eyes, searching past coveralls and grease for an answer I had no intention of offering aloud. He had enough. TG-0717. Not rumor, not borrowed valor. Ink earned during a summer in Nevada, where I learned to think 3 steps ahead in mock engagements. I closed my hand over the tattoo and finished securing the buckle. My heart stayed steady, but I could feel it beating, that hollow beneath my ear where a headset rests. The ground power cart clicked live outside. Ground called for a radio check. I answer out of habit. Voice level. Name withheld. My father found his voice again. "This is insane," he said to the room. Not to me. "A mechanic can't fly." He repeated it more softly, like someone trying to convince physics to take a seat. The colonel didn't raise his voice. "Tower needs a 4th seat for the S-intercept. We're out of time." He gave me a single nod that carried more weight than any speech. It was permission and test folded into one. I looked at the engine instruments, dead and calm. I looked at the runway through a wedge of hangar light. I looked at the man who had taught me to tie my laces into tight knots, and who had forgotten that courage can speak without volume. "I'll follow the book," I said, mostly to myself. Procedure over pride, evidence over anger. If I flew, I would fly clean. Outside, someone finally exhaled. Sound returned, a fan, a radio, a tug beeping in reverse. I lowered the visor and let the glass erase everything except the work. In my periphery, my father remained stone. The colonel's pupils were steady and bright. If you need a headline for that minute, it is the one they printed later without asking me. "A mechanic can't fly," my father shouted, forcing me into the cockpit. Then my sleeve rolled up. The colonel whispered, "TG-0717. Top Gun." The entire base went silent. My father's jaw dropped. It sounds dramatic because it was. But inside the cockpit, the drama compressed into numbers and flows and checklists. Inside the cockpit, I was not a daughter. I was a pilot no one had planned for, and a secret no one could stuff back inside a sleeve. I pressed my palms to my thighs to steady them. They were already still. The engines were cold iron. The air smelled like the edge of storm. "Zara," the colonel said at last. Name used, rank omitted. "Say when you're ready." I drew one breath and answered, "Now, sir." The harness pressed against my collarbones as I tightened it. Ground crew, thumbs rose. My hands moved alongside them. Batteries on. APU. Screens alive. Nothing mystical, just small tasks executed in order. "Shadow 4, radio check," the colonel said on interflight. "Shadow 4, loud and clear." I answered. Tower cleared us. The hangar's bright rectangle slid across the canopy like a curtain parting on a stage I had sworn off. I kept the scan steady, temps, pressures, hydraulics, anchoring myself to the present moment. At the edge of my vision, my father stood near the steel table, staring at the floor as though answers lived inside the oil sheen. I had trained myself not to chase that gaze. Today it chased me. I let it pass through. We held short at the arming area. Engines idled with a patient growl. The sensations you remember are the small ones. Harness creak, fan tick, the tap of a pen because idle hands resist stillness. Shadow 4, confirm flight status. The tower asked, skepticism audible. Emergency authorization per wing, I said. The colonel acknowledged. The frequency flattened. Questions would wait. The clock would not. Orders read simply. Locate, protect, guide, rescue, return with the living. No sentiment in that, just letters and purpose. The taxi's centerline strobed beneath the nose. A kid behind base ops glass lifted a phone. Viral moments are sugar highs. Airplanes don't care about applause. "Lockhart," the colonel said quietly. "No teatrix. Do the work." "That's the plan," I replied. "Exact gets brave." Exact holds the stick at neutral until physics deserve more. Lined up, I waited for the final clearance. A touch of crosswind nudged the rudder. I pictured the sky cool and clear. Shadow 4, cleared immediate, the tower said. "Copy." Throttles up. The jet hummed. The runway came toward me in the takeoff roll. The world compresses to needle flicker and painted stripe, then expands like a breath released. I kept the expansion at the edge of vision. Rotating, I glanced back at the hangar. My father was a rigid shape. He used to check my laces before track meets. He used to clap once when I cleared a bar. The man who loved beginnings had forgotten how to watch continuance. There's grief in that, but not the kind that earns a day off. Gear up, climb, handoff. Mission data loaded onto the glass. A grid, a coordinate string, a sliver of forest that could conceal or shelter depending on how fast you arrived. My story didn't begin here. Years ago, I stepped sideways when forward was blocked by politics and a bad outcome that wasn't mine alone to carry. I buried the pilot beneath coveralls and called it wisdom. The jet didn't care. Machines remember without judgment. On interflight, the colonel delivered vectors and rescue timing. I repeated them and trimmed slightly to smooth out the turbulence. The cabin smelled drier above 3,000 feet. Below, the base shrank into geometry. From up here, the hangar was a gray stamp. My father got inside it. I tried to imagine his version of this morning, that he had forced me, unmasked me, finally made me comply. The stories would make him taller. I let him keep the posture. I kept the truth. We crossed a river in brown fields. The fight inside me cooled into something sustainable, not heat, not ice, but a steady blue pilot light. The colonel fed updates. I responded without ornamentation. Clarity wastes fewer seconds than anger. If you listen for anger, you miss what this moment actually is. The beginning of a ledger coming into balance. Not fire, but form, line by line, until the numbers stop wavering. At altitude, the sky took on that high, hollow sound that makes you feel like a pencil mark on white paper. I had loved that as a child. From an outline, you can be redrawn. The brief ran through me. Search grids, ID protocols, communication windows. The romance belongs to runway photographs. Out here you respect small things executed with precision. They add up to survival. I checked the clock and marked the first turn. South, then east, then south again, threading a needle through dark cloth. The needle is small. The stitch holds lives. I did not look back. The story could chase me afterward. For now, there was the work and the thin line it offered between loss and return. Search and rescue is not glamorous. If we failed, someone would deliver a letter and a bag of folded flags. If we succeeded, no one would trend. That is the bargain I respect. You show up with competence and leave with silence. The first waypoint blinked steadily to life on the heads-up display. A green promise. It felt like sitting a test I had studied for in the dark. Answers held, reasons withheld. I breathed once, counted 3, and let the jet's patience become my own. The radio hissed, and then a clipped voice broke through, urgency wrapped in static. Backup pilot admitted to hospital. Shadow flight 1 ship short. Immediate launch required. The words folded into my headset like orders written in lightning. No one asked who I was. No one questioned why I knew the startup flow. They only cared that one cockpit sat cold and empty while men waited for rescue in a forest that forgave no delays. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. I had studied, drilled, and memorized every contour of this cockpit for years in silence. The chance arrived not with applause, but with necessity. I hadn't volunteered. Necessity had drafted me. Shadow 4, stand by for ignition sequence. The controller barked. My hand hovered over the switches, steady. The hangar was gone. There was only the checklist running through my veins. Battery on. The hum filled the cabin like the first full breath after being held underwater. Avionics alive. Screens brightening one by one. Fuel flow checked. Pumps green. I whispered the calls to myself. More ritual than instruction. Every switch click was a syllable of a language I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Outside, the ground crew watched like witnesses at a trial no one had anticipated. A sergeant mouthed something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps disbelief. My father remained frozen at the edge of the hangar, as though movement would confirm the nightmare he had just witnessed. His daughter, in a seat where only sons, only chosen men, were supposed to sit. Tower confirms launch authorization. The colonel's voice cut through, firm, final. Zara, proceed. The use of my name anchored me. For 12 years it had been airman, mechanic, or you. Hearing Zara spoken in that calm, authoritative tone sealed the moment. No turning back. I reached for the throttles. The F-22 shuddered awake. The engine spun, a rising whine swelling into a growl that vibrated through the seat, through my ribs. Heat shimmered across the tarmac. Ground power carts rattled with the surge. The Raptor was no longer simply a machine. It was a pulse synchronized with mine. Checklists advanced. Hydraulic pressure stable. Oxygen flow confirmed. Flight controls free and correct. My sleeve brushed the tattoo again. And though I kept my eyes forward, I felt the colonel still watching, still carrying that whisper. Top Gun. Shadow 4, taxi, the tower ordered. I released the brakes. The jet rolled, nose tracking along the yellow line, the hangar receding behind me. Through the canopy, I caught a final glimpse of my father. He wasn't shouting anymore. His hands hung useless at his sides. I wondered if he recognized the irony. All those years preaching that I could not, and now I must. The urgency pressed harder with every foot of taxiway. The rest of Shadow Flight was already spinning up. 3 Raptors waiting like wolves at the runway's mouth. Their formation needed a 4th. Rescue required 4 wings tight together, not 3. Lockhart acknowledged readiness. The colonel demanded on interflight. Shadow 4 ready. I replied, voice level. The syllables felt surreal. I wasn't borrowing a call sign anymore. I was living it. The tower's tone sharpened. Shadow Flight cleared immediate scramble. Search and rescue priority. Survivors in hostile terrain. Time on station critical. That last phrase, time on station critical, carried a vertical spike of weight. Somewhere out there, people were bleeding, waiting, minutes away from vanishing into casualty lists. Lives balanced on my competence, not on anyone's approval. No argument could be louder than that truth. The lead Raptor thundered forward, nose lifting, afterburners carving daylight into heat. 2 followed. Then it was my turn. I pushed the throttles into military power. The jet roared. The The runway stretched beneath me. Numbers climbing. Control surfaces biting the air. At 140 knots, I eased back. The nose lifted. Wheels left the earth. The cockpit filled with vibration and freedom. The base shrank below. My father, invisible now. The colonel's voice steadied in my ear. Shadow 4 airborne. I joined the formation, sliding into the open slot as though I had been rehearsing for this day in secret. In truth, I had. The line was complete. For Raptors turned east, wings catching the sun. A cross of steel over fragile ground. My pulse slowed into rhythm with the jet. Fear had no place here. Neither did doubt. The mission had started, and once it started, there was only forward. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the click of a lock turning, the moment when past denial gave way to present reality. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't hiding. I was the fourth ship in shadow flight, and the ledger of my life had a new entry. I whispered it, unheard beneath the roar. For once, Dad, watch me. The wheels left the ground. The shudder of asphalt faded, and the silence of altitude took over. I pulled the landing gear lever, felt the thunk of retraction beneath my feet, and let the jet climb, nose slicing into blue. My breath came steady, but I knew down there on the ground, breathing was anything but calm. Within seconds, the chatter began. The base's internal comms, ordinarily reserved for operational calls, were alive with side-channel noise. Did anyone authorize this? A controller whispered, his voice bleeding across the frequency. Another snapped back. Authorized or not, she's airborne. You want to call her down in the middle of a scramble. The tower cut in, attempting to restore order. Shadow flight. Proceed to mission vector. Maintain calm discipline. But beneath that order, the storm gathered. I could sense it even at 30 feet, then 300, then 3,000. My name was already a spark in dry grass. Zara Lockhart, the mechanic who had spent 12 years crawling beneath fuselages, was now strapped into an F-22 streaking east, and everyone had an opinion. Some voices rose sharp with condemnation. This is reckless. She isn't certified. We'll be court-martialing the colonel before dawn. Others spat cynicism. She's a stunt, a liability. We've put an untested wrench-turner in the deadliest jet on Earth. But counter voices emerged too, hushed but growing. She knew the startup sequence cold. Did you hear her checklists? That wasn't guesswork. Another admitted, almost grudgingly, you saw the tattoo. That wasn't decoration. That was designation. TG-0717. Someone trained her for this. The base divided in real time. Lines drawn not in policy, but in instinct. Some held to the rules, others to the evidence before their eyes. A mechanic had done the impossible, taken flight when no one else could. I glanced at my wingman, Shadow 3, sliding into position off my right shoulder. His voice crackled in my headset, low but distinct. Lockhart, you fly like you've been here before. I didn't answer. The less I said, the more the silence communicated. Down below, I imagined the command post, screens glowing, officers leaning over desks, clerks frozen with pens half raised. My father would still be on the tarmac, jaw locked, unwilling to move lest someone see him stagger. For 12 years, he had preached the barrier between what I did and what he did. Now that barrier had evaporated in jet wash. A female voice pierced through, higher up the chain, clipped with fury. Who signed off on this? The colonel answered, steady and unmovable. I did. You'll answer for it. Maybe, but not before she answers the call. That line would echo, I knew, not just in that room, but in the days ahead. A defense, a defiance, a wager staked on me. As the jet leveled into its climb, the landscape spread beneath like an open file, rivers, roads, fields shrinking into pattern. My headset carried the faint sound of controllers debating policy while attempting to sound professional. To those with no voice in the decision, it was simpler. They looked up from the motor pool, from the barracks, from the chow line, and saw contrails slicing skyward. A rumor turned legend in minutes. The mechanic was flying. I pictured the cafeteria erupting, spoons clattering, conversations colliding. She's in the Raptor, someone shouted. And the younger ones, Those who still believed rules bent beneath truth grinned as if they'd watched the world flip right side up for the first time. But disbelief was just as sharp. "Mark my words," one master sergeant muttered. "When she crashes, every one of us will wear the stain." And maybe that was the exact point of friction, the line between faith and fear, between honoring a lifetime of tradition or trusting the evidence of a single moment, between rules inscribed in manuals and rules rewritten in blood and survival. In my canopy reflection, I caught my own eyes. They didn't look afraid. They looked resolved. I wasn't here to prove anyone wrong. I was here because someone's clock was running out in the wilderness, and there were only 4 jets in this world that could reach him in time. I just happened to be inside one of them. The colonel broke the growing silence on the mission net. "Shadow flight, Titan formation. Base chatter is irrelevant. Mission is primary." His words steadied the channel, but I knew back at base it was far from quiet. Papers would be flying, tempers flaring, careers balanced on the edge of whether I came back alive. The F-22 cut through cloud. Sunlight flared off the canopy. I adjusted trim, let the jet settle into its climb. Behind me, the base disappeared beneath a veil of distance. But the noise, the opinions, the factions, those would not vanish so easily. Up here, though, there was only the mission. And the mission didn't care who resented me or who secretly cheered. It didn't care that I had grease under my nails yesterday and a control stick under my palm today. The mission only cared whether I arrived. My fingers settled on the throttle as the forest rose like dark surf beneath our nose. The colonel gave us a gentle left turn to align with the final coordinates, then went quiet. I pushed my skin wider. Radar returns, terrain lines, wind shear indicators. The map painted a green-black lattice of pines and granite. Somewhere inside that pattern, a pilot was breathing through pain and time. "Down bird, this is Shadow 4. Authenticate Bravo 2. A ragged voice came back, thin with effort. "Shadow, copy. Bravo 2 gold. Shoulders out. Can't move far. This location distorts everything. You start negotiating against your own body." I kept my voice level. "We've got you. Stay undercover. Do not attempt self-extraction." I toggled the radar to high-resolution mapping mode. Top Gun had drilled a truth into us. Read the ground like a room. Corners first, exits second, threats always. I swept for flat signatures, shadowless patches where rotor blades could spin without turning to confetti. Most of the valley was a comb of teeth. But to the southeast, a lighter smear winked in the SAR image. Irregular, elongated, roughly 60 meters, ring by deadfall. Potential LZ, grid 587 by 219, I called. "Colonel, requesting we mark and verify." "Approved." 2 and 3, maintain high cover. 4, run the glass. Wind knifed across the ridge. I eased into a descent, not enough to risk the canopy, enough to sharpen the reed. My hands did what they always do when the stakes turn real. Small, precise movements. Energy in the thinking, not the stick. "Down bird." I said, "Can you activate beacon momentarily?" Negative on shoulder. "I can toggle it with my boot." "Standby." Static. A grunt. Then the soft ping on my scope jumped 3 degrees left of the previous mark. Good. He still had fight in him. I plotted a curved ingress for the rescue helo. Let the course lines snap into place. Trees leaned downhill. Rotors would need a run-in from the south to avoid vortex ring in the bowl. At 8,000 feet, I could taste smoke, faint and sour. Lightning had touched this valley earlier in the week. Fire is a second enemy. It makes you rush and makes you careless. I slowed my breathing and let the jet slow with it. "Colonel," I said, recommending LZ Sierra, coordinates uploading. Slope under 5 degrees. Canopy broken. Deadfall on the north edge only. Helicopter approach from 180. Depart 005. I'll hold overwatch on the western ridge. Copy Sierra. Rescue is 5 minutes out. 4. Maintain your altitude margin. Affirm. I skimmed the ridge line without touching the speed brakes, keeping the nose clean. Below, the clearing revealed itself in flashes through the needles. Lighter soil scar, a scatter of bleached trunks, Grass laid flat by last winter's snowmelt. Down bird, I asked. Visual on a break in the canopy, east-southeast of you. Can't raise my head, but I can hear water. I checked the topo overlay. A creek braided the clearing's edge. That tracks, I said. Hold, copy. We were a minute ahead on timeline. I used it for contingencies. If wind boxed the hello in, I had room to pull lead from the west. If smoke thickened, I could navigate on headings alone. Top Gun's rule of 3 options kept its promise. Fear lives in singular plans. Shadow 2's voice slid in dry. 4. That's a tight bowl. Tight, not fatal. Breeze crosstails on approach, shifts to headwind in the last 10 yards. They'll appreciate those last 10 yards. Copy. From altitude, decision-making feels like drawing a straight line through a crowded room without brushing shoulders. On the ground, it comes down to inches. I owed inches to a pilot biting down on his tongue somewhere beneath the green canopy. Rescue inbound, 2 minutes, the colonel reported. Mark Sierra. I pulsed a covert laser on the clearing's edge for the hello sensors, then throttled back to keep noise off the valley. I kept talking so the down pilot wouldn't fall into the blank space paying cars. What's your name? I asked. Rodriguez, he said, breath hissing. Alex. Copy, Alex. I'm Zara. You're not alone. Static, then faint humor. You the mechanic. I'm the 4th seat today. He laughed once, and it broke in the middle. Rescue visual, the colonel announced. A dark dust skimmed low along the creek, then grew shoulders and legs, a helicopter hugging the terrain. I tightened my turn, watching for gust signatures in the grass, reading the pine tops to see wind for what it was, not what the gauges reported. The hello flared, committed, and the clearing accepted it like a breath finally released. Its rotors carved a neat oval of dust and pollen as medics spilled out fast, green shapes against the pale earth, and I held my orbit measured, wings level, nose slightly high to buy time if the engine hiccuped. Shadow 2, hold east at 8,500. 3, take north at 10. Keep the bowl clean. I marked their arcs on the display and fed the hello a steady wind call. 185 at 12, gusting 16. Commit now or wave. The pilot committed. The skid kissed dirt, settled, wobbled, held. On the mission net, the colonel said nothing, which said everything. He was listening to me work. So was the entire flight. I walked the medics through route and distance like counting out beads. 50 meters to your 2 o'clock. Intermittent brush, creek on your left. LZ is marginal. Expedite. Copy. Someone grunted below. A minute later, a shape moved in the shadows. Visual on the survivor, one medic called. I kept the turn smooth, altitude steady. The threat wasn't enemy fire. It was mistakes bred by adrenaline. Shadow 4, Shadow 3 asked, curiosity tucked into formality. When did you learn to read thermal terrain like that? My eyes stayed outside. I read enough to do my job. The line landed flat and sharp simultaneously. The colonel let it pass, but I could feel the question multiplying across headsets. Who taught her this? Where did she practice? Why does the mechanic speak like a controller and a flight lead rolled into one? Below, the medics reached Rodriguez. The rotor disc flashed in the sun, physics waiting. Advise sling or carry. A medic asked, breathless. Carry, I said. Sling will eat your margin in this wind. Shadow 2 cleared his throat. You calling the hellos game now? Calling the wind, I replied. They can ignore me. They didn't. 2 medics braced Rodriguez's arm, counting off the lift. The hello settled a fraction deeper into the dust. Down bird aboard. The pilot came back, voice tight with workload. Departing Sierra. Depart on 005, I said. Wind will square you up by the creek. Shadow 3, escort them to the ridge gap. Copy, 3 said, and slid ahead like a dark blade. I stole a second to breathe. Suspicion crackled on frequencies I couldn't hear. I kept my circle and my mind inside 10 miles. Miles save lives, not arguments. The hello pulled power, lightened, drifted a hair's width left, then corrected. It clawed forward, dust falling away. Once clear the treetops, it accelerated along the creek, rotors biting clean air. Rescue outbound, the colonel said at last. Shadow flight, form on 4 for egress. He put me on the point. That choice told the base enough. I banked west, slow enough for the Hello's escort to tuck in, fast enough to keep our timeline honest. A private voice slid onto our side channel. One of the younger pilots, hushed and disbelieving. Sir, is she who I think she is? Eyes out, the colonel answered. Later, questions were already building their case. Aircrew gossip is a courtroom with no judge. Someone would demand paperwork. Someone would say the word insubordination. Someone would draft their opening statement before I even touched down. We cleared the ridge and the radio noise thinned. The Hello called altitude and fuel. I responded with headings and winds, a metronome to keep panic from picking the notes. Mechanic, Shadow 2 said again, lighter this time. You ever going to tell us where you learned to talk like that? After we get him home, I said. Copy. When we handed the Hello to approach, the valley folded closed behind us like a book permitted to end its chapter. I rolled level, trimmed out, and watched our shadow run along fields stitched in brown and green. The mission hadn't loved our debates. It had loved that we were timely. Shadow flight, the colonel said. Nice work. Praise sat strange in my ears, like a room I hadn't entered in years. I didn't need it, but I recognized the gift in his restraint. He was choosing facts over rumors, as I had, before we switched back to tower. The younger voice returned, softer. Whoever you are, thanks. Do your job, I said, and meant it for myself first. Approach took us, then tower, then the familiar cadence of home. From altitude, the base looked harmless, like lines a child might draw and color in. Inside those lines waited people with pens and opinions, and both could cut. Shadow 4, the tower called. Expect straight in. Roger, I said. I glanced at the canopy's reflection, at the faint line of ink beneath my sleeve. Suspicion could grow all it wanted. The man in the back of that helicopter was alive, and that was a fact with weight. I set the altimeter bug for pattern altitude and let the jet descend smoothly. No flourish, no victory roll. Work done, right doesn't wave. It lands. The runway stretched out like a long gray tongue, heat shimmer rising in the late afternoon. My hands rested steady on the stick as the wheels kissed asphalt. The jet settled with a hiss of rubber and smoke. A smooth landing no one expected from a so-called mechanic. I brought the throttle back, air brakes up, and the aircraft slowed into a rolling hush. But the silence outside wasn't peace. It was pressure. Through the canopy, I saw the line of figures at the edge of the tarmac. Officers, enlisted personnel, ground crew, even a handful of medics who had hurried over after hearing the chatter. No one concealed their stares. Some faces were lit with awe, others tight with suspicion, but every gaze burned. The rumors had landed ahead of me. Shadow 4, clear of active. I reported calmly, voice even. Copy 4. Taxi to North Apron. The tower answered. There was hesitation in the controller's tone, as though uncertain what rank or title to attach to my call sign. I taxied slowly, the canopy reflecting the sunset. When I cut engines, the whine died and was replaced by the heavier sound of murmurs, unfiltered, raw. That's Lockhart. She flew the bird. No, she commanded the rescue. She's not even on flight status. The words floated, sharp as glass. I popped the canopy and climbed down, boots touching ground that felt suddenly foreign. My helmet hung at my side, heavy. Across the apron, I caught sight of him, my father. He stood rigid among a cluster of senior officers, his dress uniform immaculate, jaw locked. The colonel was beside him, hands clasped behind his back, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. For a moment, no one moved. The scene resembled a photograph, frozen, airless. Then my crew chief broke it, jogging up with a mix of pride and disbelief. Zara, that was, he caught himself, eyes darting toward the gathering of brass. He saluted instead. I returned the gesture, sharp and deliberate. The salute wasn't for me. It was for the work we had just done. But the officers weren't returning salutes. They were measuring me. A major I barely knew muttered, not quietly enough. A mechanic in the cockpit? Reckless. Another answered lower but firm. If she hadn't been, Rodriguez will be dead. The argument was starting in plain view. No one cared if I heard. I walked forward, helmet still in hand, spine straight. My father's eyes followed me. He had the look of a man caught between two truths, the one he had spoken, a mechanic can't fly, and the one I had just demonstrated. His gaze didn't soften. If anything, it hardened like stone resisting a tide. Lockhart, the colonel said evenly when I approached. Report. Survivor retrieved, sir. Rescue successful. Aircraft secured. No damage beyond standard wear. His brow flickered, the barest sign he recognized the precision of my phrasing. Acknowledged, but the silence that followed was louder than his reply. Every officer present was waiting for my father to speak. Finally, he did. You disobeyed standing orders, he said. His voice carried, intended for everyone to hear. You violated assignment boundaries. I felt the weight of eyes pressing in. My pulse stayed level. I acted under exigent circumstance. The mission required one more aircraft immediately. I filled that gap. The colonel's gaze flickered to my father, then back to me. He said nothing, but the faint crease in his forehead told me he had registered my phrasing. Formal, careful, composed as if I were already defending myself before a review board. My father's jaw tightened. You embarrassed me in front of this base. The words landed heavier than any accusation of insubordination. Embarrassment, not failure, was what cut him. I held his stare. I saved a man in front of this base. The murmurs surged again, divided between admiration and unease. A lieutenant near the back whispered, "She's right." Someone else hissed, "She's out of line." The colonel raised a hand, and the noise dimmed. "Enough," he said with finality, though his eyes remained on me longer than protocol demanded. "Lockhart, stand by for debrief at 1900. "Yes, sir." He turned away, and the officers followed, but my father lingered. For half a breath, his eyes met mine. What I saw there wasn't pride, nor pure anger. It was something harder to name, fear, perhaps, of losing control of the story he had told about me all these years. Then he pivoted sharply and left. I exhaled slowly, steadily, not allowing my shoulders to sag. Around me, whispers still flitted like moths in darkness. Some looked at me like a fraud exposed, others like a truth revealed. I corrected neither impression. I turned back toward the hangar, helmet under my arm, and walked. The tarmac felt heavier than when I had taxied out, but my steps did not falter. The base was no longer the same. Neither was I. The summons arrived at dawn, delivered not by a clerk, but by an MP carrying a sealed folder. He said nothing, only tapped the order with 2 fingers and left me in my quarters staring at the envelope. I broke the seal and read the single line that mattered. Report to the command chamber at 0800 hours. I knew before I walked through the door who would be waiting. The chamber was colder than the hangar, though no engines hummed there. Flags lined the walls, and a long, polished table gleamed under harsh lights. At the head sat the colonel, posture straight as a drawn saber. To his right, my father. He didn't look at me when I entered, his gaze fixed on a point across the table, as though he had already determined I wasn't worth seeing. "Lockhart," the colonel said, clipped. "Seat." I did, sliding into the lone chair opposite them. A recorder clicked on somewhere, its red light blinking like a warning. "Yesterday's actions saved a man's life," the colonel began, his voice measured. "But they also raise questions that cannot be ignored. Your flight, your coordination, and..." He paused, eyes narrowing the tattoo. His words landed like a gavel. My sleeve felt suddenly heavier, though the ink beneath my skin had been part of me for years. TG0717, a code that was never supposed to be seen here. "Not like this. We need an explanation," the colonel continued. "Where did you acquire the designation Top Gun 0717? Who authorized that marking?" The silence stretched. I could feel the tension bending the room. Then my father spoke, his voice colder than the steel chairs. "I submitted the formal request for investigation," he said. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It was him, my own father. The one who had thrown down the words "a mechanic can't fly" was now the hand pressing the blade deeper. The colonel didn't flinch. "Colonel Lockhart Sr. has raised concerns about misrepresentation. He suggests this tattoo implies unauthorized training or a false claim of status. The phrase cuts sharper than accusation. False claim. I met my father's eyes. He finally looked at me, but there was no warmth. Only the satisfaction of a man attempting to corner what he could not control. I never misrepresented myself. I said evenly. My voice didn't rise. I kept it steady, calm, a counterweight to their storm. Then explain it, the colonel pressed. Because yesterday you flew like a graduate. You issued commands like a combat instructor, and you read terrain as if you had a decade in the air. None of that matches your record. The record, the paper life they maintained for me, stripped clean of the years that mattered. I did what needed to be done, I said. I filled the gap when no one else could. That isn't the answer we need, my father snapped. The words echoed through the chamber. He leaned forward, fists resting on the table. This isn't about yesterday. This is about the truth you've kept buried. That code on your skin ties you to something you were never meant to touch. Admit it. I stare back at him, pulse steady, though my hands press tight against my legs. Admit it. That was what he wanted. Confession, surrender, a fracture in the wall I had built. But I would not hand him that victory. I won't deny my training, I said softly. But neither will I let you twist it. That tattoo isn't a fraud. It's a marker of where I've been and what I've survived. The colonel's gaze sharpened. For the first time, I saw curiosity beneath the steel. My father's face darkened further, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowing to slits. You're hiding behind riddles, he spat. You embarrassed me before this base, and now you embarrass this uniform. No, I answered, my voice calm but weighted. I honored it. Yesterday, when seconds mattered, I honored it. Perhaps more than you wanted me to. The room stilled. Even the colonel's hands froze on the table. The recorder's red light blinked on, off, on again, marking every second of silence. At last, the colonel exhaled, slow and controlled. This inquiry is not over. Lockhart, you're confined to base until further notice. You will remain under observation, and this matter, his eyes flicked to my father, then back to me, is far from closed. Yes, sir, I said. The meeting adjourned, but my father didn't move at first. He stared at me as the others rose, as though trying to burn something out of me with his silence. Then he turned sharply and walked out, heels echoing hard against the floor. I sat there alone a moment longer, the red light finally dimming. I understood then that yesterday had been about survival. Today was about survival of another kind. And this storm, the one my father had set in motion, was only beginning to break. The chamber emptied, but the weight of my father's accusation lingered long after. That night, I lay awake in my quarters, the hum of base generators leaking through the walls like a reminder that no place here was ever truly quiet. My mind slipped back, not by choice but by force, dragged into memories I had locked away for years. I was 23 again, the air salty and sharp at Naval Air Station Fallon. The sun glared off the tarmac, blinding in the Nevada heat. I stood among a line of graduates in flight suits. Our boots polished so perfectly they reflected the bleachers behind us. My name had just been called. Lockhart, Zara Lockhart, distinguished in multi-platform tactical integration. The metal rested heavy against my chest, but what I carried inside weighed even more, the certainty that I had earned my place, not as anyone's daughter, not as an afterthought, but as a pilot who had bled and sweated through every drill. They said I had a rare ability, the way I could map a battlefield in my mind, linking air, ground, and electronic warfare as though I had been born with an antenna hidden beneath my skin. During the final exercises, I had coordinated a simulated strike where F-18s, drones, and ground artillery moved as a single unit. My instructor said it shaved minutes off what should have been impossible. That day, the tactical board had lit up blue and the red had faded fast. When the commanding officer pinned the ribbon, he whispered, "Don't lose this, Lockhart. The Navy needs minds like yours." His words carried pride, belief, and the kind of validation I had never once received at home. But even in that moment of triumph, my eyes scanned the bleachers looking for one face. Rows of families applauded, some waving flags, some crying behind sunglasses. Mothers embraced children, Fathers saluted. Brothers and sisters shouted names into the dry wind. I searched for him, my father. The chair marked reserved for Colonel Arthur Lockhart sat empty. The sight burned more than any desert sun. I had known he would not come, but part of me had hoped regardless. It was a cruel habit, that hope, always reaching for the acknowledgement that never arrived. He had dismissed my acceptance in a Top Gun as an administrative error, claimed no maintenance brat of his would stand alongside real pilots. He told me I'd be chewed up and spat out. I had imagined that perhaps, just perhaps, he'd want to see me prove him wrong. But his absence screamed louder than any insult. It told me he didn't care whether I succeeded. He cared only that I had dared. The ceremony blurred after that. The cheering felt muffled, like cotton stuffed in my ears. I kept my posture straight, my smile locked in place, but inside something cracked and hardened all at once. I promised myself I would no longer chase his pride. Yet the ink under my sleeve, the numbers and letters TG 0717 became my own vow. Not merely a mark of where I had trained, but a reminder that even if the man who gave me his name denied me, the sky had not. Top Gun had tested me. The number was mine, earned and etched forever. The flashback shifted. Cockpit drills, endless nights poring over tactical manuals, my voice steady on comms as squadrons moved under my direction. Lockhart, you're seeing it before the rest of us, one instructor said during a radar simulation. Like you're reading the board before it's drawn. I accepted the praise carefully, knowing too much of it would only fuel my father's anger if word reached him. But in those moments, I felt alive in a way no empty chair could take from me. I had belonged. The memory snapped back to the present. The dim lamp on my desk cast a narrow cone of light. My quarters felt smaller, suffocating. My father's words from the meeting circled like vultures. False claim, misrepresentation. Admit it. He hadn't been there when I earned it. He hadn't witnessed the drills, the bruises, the exhaustion, the triumph. And now, years later, he wanted to erase it, as though absence gave him authority over memory. I pressed my hand against the ink on my arm. For a moment, I felt the heat of Fallon's sun again, the weight of the metal, the hush of the officer's whisper. That was the truth, not my father's silence, not his investigation. The truth was that I had stood among the best, and I had not broken. And if the storm gathering now wished to strip me down, I would face it the way I had faced that empty chair. Spine straight, eyes forward, heart burning with a pride I no longer needed him to grant me. The memory of Fallon had burned bright, but like all fire, it eventually dimmed beneath the weight of politics and command. What no one in that meeting room knew, what my father had never forgiven, was the real reason I had stepped away from combat aviation. It wasn't fear of flying. It wasn't lack of skill. It was the way one mission came apart. Not because of me, but because of a decision that came from above, a decision that turned into a scar carried by every survivor. We had been tasked with escorting a medevac convoy out of hostile territory. The map was straightforward enough. 2 valleys, 1 extraction zone, a time constraint. My recommendation was clear. Divert through the northern pass. High turbulence risk, but low ambush risk. I had studied the terrain for days, cross-referencing intelligence with drone sweeps. But at the briefing table, the commanding officer overruled me. Southern Pass is faster, he said. Speed over caution. That's the order. We obeyed. Orders weren't requests. The first 10 minutes were textbook. Jets overhead, helicopters sweeping low, ground teams advancing quickly. Then came the missiles. They struck from both ridge lines, fire carving the sky open. The Southern Pass had been seeded with man-pads, something the intelligence had missed or dismissed. The convoy scattered. I still hear the alarms shrieking in my headset. The pilot's voice cracking over the radio. Taking fire. Engine out. Going down. We lost 2 birds. 1 medevac didn't survive. The men inside had names, families, lives. And all I could think as the smoke rose was that I had known this would happen. I called it. Yet in the official record, the mission was stamped with the words pilot support, Zara Lockhart. I argued. I filed reports. I pleaded with the chain of command to acknowledge that we had followed a flawed order. But the military machine grinds slowly, and it grinds down anyone who refuses to stay silent. Instead of justice, there were whispers. Lockhart hesitated. Lockhart lacked conviction. Lockhart isn't suited for combat. Every corridor I walked afterward seemed to hum with those rumors. My peers avoided my eyes, or worse, looked at me with pity. I could still fly. I could still fight. But I was marked. And in a system where reputation travels faster than truth, marks like that end careers. So I did the unthinkable. I requested reassignment, maintenance division, support operations, the kind of work no one fights over because no one notices. I told myself it was a tactical retreat, a means of avoiding being dragged into politics that had nothing to do with flying skill and everything to do with ego. But I knew what it looked like on paper. Zara Lockhart, once Top Gun, voluntarily walking off the flight line. To my father, that was betrayal. He didn't see the nuance, the suffocating politics, or the reality of being ground down by command decisions beyond my reach. To him, war was simple. You fight, you win, or you die trying. Anything less was dishonor. And in his eyes, I had chosen dishonor with my own signature on the reassignment request. When I returned home on leave after the transfer, he didn't greet me with an embrace. He didn't even extend his hand. He looked at the uniform I wore, support insignia replacing fighter squadron patches, and said, "You quit. I don't raise quitters." His words landed harder than any missile ever had. For years after, he refused to discuss the subject. When others in the family attempted to defend me, he silenced them. Failure is failure. Don't dress it up. His belief in strength was absolute, forged across decades of combat tours. To him, dignity came only through endurance and visible victory. The notion that I had stepped aside to protect myself, to protect my conscience, was unacceptable. What he never grasped was that walking away had been the harder choice. Staying would have meant watching more decisions like that one unfold, knowing I'd be powerless to prevent them. Staying would have meant becoming complicit. Leaving was the only way I could preserve my integrity. But integrity doesn't appear on medals. It doesn't show up in after-action reports. And so in his eyes, I had failed. That judgment, silent and constant, hardened into something I carried like lead in my chest. It shaped every word between us. It filled every silence at family dinners. It was the shadow behind his glare in that meeting room when he demanded answers about TG-0717. He wasn't merely asking about a tattoo. He was asking whether I still had the right to carry his name. The truth was complicated, but in his world, complications were excuses. And I knew, as the echoes of that failed mission replayed in my head, that I had been fighting two wars ever since, one in the air and one at home, against a man who believed he had the authority to define what strength meant. The meeting with the colonel and my father had left the air around me charged, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. They expected me to remain on the defensive, justifying, explaining, allowing them to strip me layer by layer until nothing remained but the shadow of what I once was. They were wrong. That night, alone in the barracks beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, I made a decision. If my father wanted a war, I would give him one, but not the kind fought with missiles or maneuvers. This battle would be waged with truth, records, and the rules he had always claimed to honor. I began with what I knew best: data. Every order left a footprint. Every reassignment. Every interference. Every whispered phone call between my father and someone in command left fragments behind. My years in logistics had taught me that paper trails never vanish. They scatter. All you need is patience and the discipline to piece them back together. I accessed old networks, digging through archived records with the same precision I had once used to track fuel consumption on combat sorties. I found requests stamped with his initials, special authorizations bypassing standard procedure. Some appeared routine at first glance, but when paired with after-action reports, patterns emerged. Missions redirected, pilots shuffled like pawns, entire squadrons reshaped because he believed he knew better. I traced emails where his language dripped with influence. For the good of the unit, for the honor of the service. To him, honor was a shield against scrutiny. To me, it was a smokescreen. I collected copies quietly, storing them on encrypted drives, careful never to access the same file twice from the same terminal. But documents were only part of the fight. The system had rules, and I needed to learn how to weaponize them. That's when I reached out to a military lawyer, a major with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She met me in an unmarked office near the airstrip, with a blind stayed shut and the clock ticked too loudly. "You know who you're going up against?" she asked after scanning the first folder of evidence. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Your father." She exhaled through her nose, the kind of sound lawyers make when the case is already giving them a headache. Colonel Lockhart has decades of service behind him, medals, command citations. People don't want to believe men like him abuse the system. They'll call it strategic discretion. Unless I show them it's more than discretion, I countered. It's manipulation. It's control. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "You'll need more than internal records. If you want the committee to hear this, you need a paper wall so high no one can climb over it." That became my mission. When I wasn't on duty, I was at my desk with files spread like battle maps. I built timelines, cross-referencing his decisions against outcomes, highlighting every instance where his interference had cost lives, trust, or careers. I didn't simply want to expose him. I wanted to demonstrate beyond denial that his rigid belief in control had corroded the very structure he claimed to protect. At night, when exhaustion tugged at my eyes, I forced myself to remain awake. I could almost hear his voice in the back of my mind telling me I was weak, that I was wasting my time, that no one would ever side with me against him. I used that voice as fuel. Every doubt became another reason to press forward. When I finally stepped back and examined what I had gathered, it wasn't merely a pile of documents. It was an arsenal. Orders bearing his signature, emails carrying his tone, reports with outcomes tied directly to his decisions. Even a memo recommending my reassignment, phrased so carefully it read like concern but carried the weight of exile. The lawyer reviewed it all, her pen tapping the margin of each page. "It's solid," she said finally. "Enough to file a formal complaint through military channels. Enough to reach the oversight committee if we keep pressing." I asked her what would happen if we prevailed. "You'll clear your name," she replied, "and you'll bring him down." The word should have felt like triumph. Instead, they settled heavy in my chest. This wasn't about victory. It was about survival, the survival of truth, of the reputation I had bled to build, of the small voice inside me that refused to accept silence as the price of loyalty. I walked out of that office into the night air. Planes roared overhead, and for a moment, I tilted my face toward the sound, remembering what it felt like to fly without shadows chasing me. I wasn't there yet, but I was preparing. I was readying my counterstrike. And for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt momentum. The day before the hearing, the corridors of the Pentagon seemed narrower than ever, their beige walls pressing inward like silent witnesses. I had spent the night revising my case, rehearsing answers, drilling myself to remain calm. The folders in my hand felt heavier than steel. I thought I was prepared for anything until I saw him waiting at the bend of the hall. My father. He stood with hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid, eyes colder than the marble floor. Time had not softened him. Rank had carved him into stone. His uniform looked immaculate, not a thread displaced. For a moment, I was 23 again, standing at attention before him, waiting for a nod of approval that never came. "Zara," he said, voice clipped and commanding. "This is your last chance to walk away." I stopped a few feet from him, gripping my folders tighter. Walk away from what? From truth? From everything you buried? His jaw tightened. From ruining yourself? From dragging our name into the mud? You think the committee will celebrate you for this? They'll see an ungrateful daughter desperate for attention. I almost laughed, but it came out hollow. Attention. I didn't spend years in the shadows for attention. I stepped away from flying. I buried myself in logistics. I kept my head down while others wore medals. Don't call this desperation. Call it survival. He took one step closer, his shadow falling across me. I built this family's reputation. Decades of service, sacrifice, blood, and command. Do you think you can tear it down with a stack of memos and your stubborn pride? I raised my chin. No, I don't think. I know. Because those memos don't lie. Orders don't lie. You rewrote missions, gambled with lives, turned service into your personal chessboard. I was there when men paid the price for your decisions. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or the faintest trace of doubt. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He leaned in, his voice a low warning. This is your last chance to stop. Withdraw now, and I can make this disappear. You'll keep your uniform. You'll keep what little name you've earned. But if I go forward, I cut in, my voice surprising even me with its steadiness, you'll disown me. Pretend I never existed. You've already done that once. You ignored me at my graduation. You abandoned me after I left the cockpit. You made a career out of pretending I don't measure up. What more can you take? He froze at that. For a moment. The hallway was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. His expression hardened again, but the silence between us carried the weight of a truth we both recognized. I was no longer the cadet waiting for his approval. I gave you one chance to stand down, he said finally, each word sharp as a blade. You'll regret this. Not today, not tomorrow, but when you realize you've traded loyalty for self-destruction. I shook my head slowly. No, Father. I traded silence for justice. I already regret the years I stayed quiet. That was my mistake, and I don't make the same mistake twice. His lips pressed into a thin line, the kind commanders draw before signing an order. He didn't answer, just stepped past me, his shoulder brushing mine like a dismissal. The scent of starch and leather trailed after him, a reminder of everything he had been, everything he still clung to. I stood in the hallway long after he was gone, folders pressed to my chest. The doubt he had tried to plant didn't disappear. It never did, but beneath it, something stronger took root. Resolve. This confrontation wasn't merely a warning. It was confirmation. He was afraid. And if he was afraid, it meant I was on the right path. When I finally moved again, the echo of my boots followed me down the corridor, steady and deliberate. The arc of emotion had dipped low, pulling me into the shadows of doubt and memory. But I knew what was approaching. The spike, the hearing, the moment where all the secrets and scars would be forced into the light. And when that moment arrived, I would not retreat. The hearing room was colder than the corridors had been. Rows of stern-faced committee members sat beneath heavy lights, their nameplates gleaming on the long table. Cameras recorded everything, the little red dots blinking like reminders that no word could be taken back. I walked in with my folders pressed to my chest, my uniform crisp, my pulse steady. I reminded myself of one thing. I had already survived worse. My father was already present. He sat beside the colonel, his ribbons and medals reflecting like shields, his posture unshakable. When he looked at me, it was not as a daughter, but as an adversary. The chair recognized him first. General Lockhart, you may begin. He rose smoothly, unfolding his words with the precision of a man who had rehearsed every syllable. This committee must understand, he began, his voice confident and measured, that my daughter Zara Lockhart has never been fully capable of the duties expected of her. She has long exhibited tendencies of recklessness and defiance. Her recent actions in commandeering an F-22 without authorization confirm this. She placed lives at risk, endangered classified operations, and acted well outside her assigned role as a maintenance technician. He let his words hang, and the weight of his authority filled the room. Murmurs rippled among the observers seated at the back. To them, he was not merely a father. He was a decorated officer whose record stretched across decades. His condemnation carried the weight of a verdict. When the chair motioned to me, I stood slowly. My knees did not shake. My voice did not break. With respect, committee members, I began. What you just heard was not testimony of fact. It was an attempt to erase evidence and preserve reputation at the cost of truth. I opened the first folder, sliding radar printouts across the table toward the aides. Exhibit 1. Radar logs from the night of the crash. These confirm my maneuvers and precise coordination with the rescue helicopter. Every movement was consistent with protocol, not reckless improvisation. I let them study the documents before continuing. Exhibit 2. Flight logs. While officially listed as a technician, my records show over 200 log simulator hours signed by certified instructors. My familiarity with the F-22 was not coincidence. It was documented training. I paused, glancing at my father. His jaw twitched, but he held his silence. I continued drawing out statements. Exhibit 3. Testimonies from fellow pilots who heard my commands during the rescue. I tapped the document. Lieutenant James confirms I coordinated thermal readings to identify a safe landing zone. Captain Ruiz testifies that without my input, the injured pilot would not have been retrieved alive. The murmurs in the room shifted. They were listening now. The tide was beginning to turn. My father adjusted his collar, his composed facade showing its first fracture. Finally, I reached for the flash drive. An aide inserted it into the monitor, and the screen behind the committee flickered to life. Exhibit 4, I said. Video footage from the cockpit during the rescue. The recording showed everything I had witnessed that night. The canopy reflecting streaks of light, the radar pulsing, my voice steady over comms. They heard me warn of crosswinds, correct altitude, direct the helicopter with clarity and precision. The video concluded with the successful extraction of the injured pilot. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of the projector powering down. I turned back to the committee. I did not take that aircraft for glory. I flew it because a man's life depended on it, and because the procedures I knew could make the difference. This was not recklessness. This was duty, the kind of duty I was trained for, and the kind I will never turn away from. One member leaned forward. General Lockhart, do you contest this evidence? My father rose slowly, his face tight, his voice strained for the first time. Evidence can be misleading. Logs can be altered. Testimonies can be manipulated. What cannot be dismissed is that she acted outside the chain of command. That alone disqualifies her. I met his gaze directly. Sometimes the chain of command fractures when those at the top place pride before principle. I acted because hesitation meant death. You taught me once that soldiers protect lives above all else. I only did what you told me. What you forgot. The room held still, the weight of my words pressing down like a storm about to break. I lowered my hands, steady, knowing the moment had arrived. Whatever they decided, the truth was already out. The silence after my final words stretched long enough to feel like another battle. I could hear the faint hum of the lights, the shifting of papers, the small cough of a committee aide. My father kept his jaw locked, refusing to look at me. I thought the session might end in deadlock, with neither side yielding. Then the colonel spoke. He leaned forward, elbows pressed to the polished wood, eyes fixed not on me, but on my father. His voice was calm and deliberate, but it carried like a challenge across the chamber. General Marcus Lockhart, he said, allow me to ask you one thing. If what we've just seen and heard, her radar coordination, her tactical precision, her command composure under duress, if this is what you consider incompetence, then tell me, what does excellence look like? The words hung in the room like a strike across the table. For the first time, my father flinched. A ripple of quiet gasps spread through the audience. Some committee members exchanged glances, their pens paused mid-note. It was not simply a question. It was a blade slid between the armor of his reputation. My father's lips parted, but no sound came. He adjusted his tie, attempted to summon that commanding tone, but hesitation betrayed him. I knew him well enough to recognize the truth. He had no answer. For years, he had believed authority itself was the measure of excellence. Now the committee was asking him to define it, and the evidence I had laid down had already spoken louder than his pride. The chair cleared her throat. We have heard the testimonies. We have reviewed the evidence. The matter now moves to deliberation. The committee withdrew briefly, leaving the room tense and hushed. My father's eyes finally met mine, a storm behind them. He said nothing, but his silence carried every unspoken word. Betrayal, humiliation, disbelief. I sat straighter, hands still, breathing even. I was not there to win against him. I was there to reclaim what was mine. Minutes later, the committee returned. The chair spoke with authority sharpened by consensus. This hearing finds the actions of Zara Lockhart to have been in accordance with the highest standards of military duty. Her initiative and tactical execution during the F-22 operation saved a life and demonstrated advanced leadership skills. The room stirred, but she continued without pause. Conversely, we find evidence of misconduct in General Marcus Lockhart's repeated interventions into his daughter's career, including suppression of her training records and unauthorized recommendations against her advancement. Such actions compromised not only her professional standing, but also the integrity of command oversight. I felt the weight shift, the air itself tilting in my direction. My father's face went pale beneath the lights, but the chair pressed forward. Accordingly, this council rules for disciplinary demotion of General Marcus Lockhart. Effective immediately, his rank will be reduced and his authority curtailed. Zara Lockhart is hereby restored to full operational status and is appointed to serve as Tactical Coalition Training Officer with oversight for Joint Force Combat Readiness. The words struck like thunderclaps. My father's shoulders stiffened, but he did not rise. The colonel gave me the briefest nod, an acknowledgement, not a victory cheer. Around the room, aides scribbled notes, observers whispered. I remained seated, though every part of me wanted to breathe deeper, to exhale years of silence. My father finally stood, his chair scraping across the floor. He opened his mouth, but the chair lifted her hand. This ruling is final, General. The vote was unanimous. His jaw clenched. He gave a stiff salute to the committee, but did not look at me again. His boots echoed against the floor as he walked out, leaving only the shadow of his presence behind. The colonel turned toward me once the door shut. "Lockhart," he said simply, "you just rewrote the manual today. Don't waste what you've earned." I rose then, folders still in hand, though they felt lighter now. "I don't intend to waste a second," I answered. The committee adjourned, the gavel striking once, final and sharp. Reporters outside waited with questions, but their noise felt distant compared to the quiet certainty settling inside me. I had been accused, diminished, silenced, and doubted. But in that room, before the highest oversight, truth had forced its way through. I walked out not with triumph, but with clarity. I was no longer merely the technician, no longer the daughter shadowed by name. I was Zara Lockhart, restored, recognized, and charged with shaping the next generation of warriors. And though my father's silence would echo long after, it no longer had the power to define me. The reversal was complete. I never imagined that vindication would feel this quiet. No trumpets, no applause, no resounding echo of victory carrying me forward. Just silence, the kind that settles after a storm, when the clouds part and the wreckage lies still. I did not crave a noisy triumph. I had wanted truth, and truth rarely arrives with fireworks. That night, I walked to the supply hangar at the base's edge, where jet fuel always mingled with dust and grease. The place was empty, the kind of emptiness that feels earned after weeks of tension. I settled onto an old steel crate and slipped the heavy watch from my wrist. For years, I had worn it like armor, the kind of weight that keeps you aware of the minutes you're racing against. I set it down beside me for the first time. I wanted to feel time pass without measurement. I looked at my wrist, bare and pale where the strap usually covered. And there it was, the mark that had started the storm. The tattoo, TG0717. A string of letters and numbers that once made me roll down my sleeves and deflect questions. It had been my secret, my shield, and my burden. Now was my reminder. I traced the edges of the ink with my thumb. The lines had blurred with age, softened by skin and sweat, but the meaning still burned. TG0717 was not merely a code. It was the day I stood in the simulation hall at Top Gun when they recognized me for tactical integration. Even as my father stayed away, it was the squadron designation of the mission that taught me failure isn't the end. And now it was the symbol the world had used to see me for what I was, not for what my father had claimed. I thought of how he appeared when the committee voted, the stiffness of his shoulders, the silence that followed him out. He had been reduced not by me shouting, not by me striking back in anger, but by me standing still, holding evidence, and letting truth speak. I hadn't needed to raise my voice to prevail. I had only needed to rise when everything conspired to keep me grounded. The hangar echoed with small sounds, the creak of metal, the distant howl of wind slipping under doors. My body finally acknowledged the exhaustion I had suppressed through days of compiling files, rehearsing testimony, and standing firm before the man who raised me. It was strange that after all the turbulence, I felt no surge of revenge, no satisfaction in watching him fall. Instead, I felt a simple exhale, a release of air I had been holding since I was 23. I let my eyes close and pictured the faces of those who had stood beside me. The wingman whose testimony carried weight. The legal officer who walked me through clauses I had never imagined needing. The colonel who asked the question that changed everything. Their voices stitched together the silence now wrapping around me. My father's words still cut. I will not pretend otherwise. He had called me unfit, incompetent, a disappointment. Those words will live in me, not as chains, but as scars. And scars, I have learned, are not weaknesses. They are proof of healing. I picked up the watch again, fastened it back to my wrist, then drew the sleeve over the tattoo. Not to conceal it this time. It wasn't about hiding. It was about carrying it privately, like a compass I no longer needed to prove existed. TG0717 was mine. It no longer belonged to whispers or suspicions. As I left the hangar, the night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of generators. The sky above stretched black and infinite. My steps were steady, my silence loud enough to fill the world. I had stood up, and that was enough. Morning light spread across the base like a thin golden film, brushing the corners of hangars, sliding down aircraft tails, catching in headquarters windows. The day after the hearing, the air felt sharper, easier to breathe. I walked down the corridor where everything had unraveled and rebuilt itself. My boots echoed, but the sound no longer felt heavy. The colonel waited at the far end, his uniform pressed, his expression carved with both gravity and warmth. He extended his hand, a simple gesture weighted with meaning. When our palms met, his grip was firm and steadying. He leaned closer, voice low but resolute. "Lockhart, don't bury yourself anymore. The sky still has room for you." I nodded, words catching in my throat before they could form sentences. That was the kind of man he was. He didn't deliver speeches. He gave direction, and that direction carried more than an order. It carried a blessing. For years, I had buried myself in silence. Silence in classrooms, silence in briefings, silence at family tables where my father's voice always dominated. I had believed that quietness would keep me safe, but silence without courage is only another form of surrender. Now silence was different. Silence was the ground on which I chose to stand. Calm, deliberate, unshaken. I stepped outside past the entrance, past the cameras still lingering for statements. I offered none. I walked through the gates toward the runway. The wind was alive there, carrying the scent of jet fuel and metal. Aircraft waited, sleek and restless like caged hawks. The concrete stretched wide and endless beneath my feet. I lifted my sleeve. The afternoon light struck the ink on my wrist, glinting against the scarred lines. For the first time, I let it stay uncovered. Let the world see what I carried. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't rebellion. It was acceptance. The motif was complete. Tattoo, silence, rising. The mark reminded me that I had been tested and had endured. The silence told me I didn't need to shout to be heard. Rising reminded me that every fall, every dismissal, every accusation was only a prelude to standing again. I thought about my father, not with hatred, but with a weary kind of compassion. His belief in honor had calcified into something brittle. He had measured love by achievement and loyalty by submission. That was his tragedy, not mine. His fall was his own, but my rise didn't need to be built on his failure. I reached the edge of the runway where the world opens wide. The late sun painted everything bronze, my boots, the steel rails, the horizon. I breathed in, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like borrowed air. It felt like mine. This was not a victory parade. It was quieter than that, stronger than that. Closure doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives with the decision to walk forward, even when you're exhausted, even when the world doubted you, even when those closest to you try to chain your steps. I stood for a while, letting the light spill over me. Then I smiled, not for the cameras, not for anyone else, just for myself. The colonel was right. The sky still had room. And this time, I would not run from it. Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with this. Where are you reading from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read every one of them with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not simply to hear more stories like this, but to become part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. Remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. I turned, the last of the day's light brushing across my bare wrist, and then I walked forward, steady, calm, unafraid.